Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This session is part of IWA and Canal and River Trust's training and workshop program for 2022 and 2023. My name is Jonathan Green. I'm the volunteers coordinator here at the Inland Waterways Association. For today's webinar, we are excited that we are joined by Terry Cavender, who's the Executive Officer and Trustee of the Buckingham Canal Society. And on that note, I'll hand over to Terry.
Helps if I unmute myself. Thanks, Jonathan. There was a comment there in the chat, Jonathan, that they can't use it for everybody, so you may want to tinker with that. Hi, folks. Let's jump right in and feel free to, as Jonathan says, pop things in chat once it's working. We will stop partway through to have a little bit of a discussion. There'll be time for questions at the end. So here goes. I've got the right buttons. Just need to be in that should be there. That's the one I want to share. So if I share, where's that gone? No, you can't see that yet. Try that and go on, wake up. That one there. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Jonathan, screen there?
Yes, indeed.
Good. Okie dokie. Let's put you all down out of the way there then. So we titled this The 5 Dimensions of Water. When I first got involved in canal restoration, everybody sort of starts saying, oh, we've got to restore the canal. So I dared to ask that strange question, why? And I got told, oh, because it was here. Heritage. Okay, get that. Got told, oh, it'd be good to get boats back to Buckingham. Yep, get that. And then people seem to sort of run out of reasons why. That was back in about 2007, 15 years ago. And over that time, I've had lots of conversations with funding bodies and others, including Waterways Recovery Group, other restoration societies. And I've fast come to the conclusion that it's time to stop talking about canals for boats or heritage. Yes, it's heresy, but let's talk about water, because everybody knows what water is. Not everybody knows what boats are. Not everybody knows what heritage is. So we've sort of started adopting this philosophy, talking with funders, planners, neighbours, partners, that it's all about water. And by the way, a boat just happens to sit on the water. It's a bit about fishing. Fish happen to be in the water. Therefore, people come and use the towpath beside to fish. And whether boaters like fishers and fishermen like boats is another discussion. But the key thing about water, as we've seen this year, last year, sometimes we have too much and we call it flooding. Sometimes we have drought and we haven't got enough. So there's all sorts of schemes in place looking at open water transfer to move water from one place to another, instead of the water companies digging up dirty great channel in the road called a pipeline. Yes, that lets them control the quality of the water, and this prevents what they lose through evaporation. But the additional benefits of open water transfer is something that we've been pushing, and certainly through the high level panel we've been talking about in various forms over time as well. So the 5 dimensions I'd call out, and we'll go deeper dive into this, is too much. We call it flooding. Where do we put it? Well, that funny freeboard thing at the top of the canal between the water level and the path has got capacity for some. And I know CRT have been looking actively at what can be done to that, what structures are in place that would prevent that extra 6 inches or whatever being used as a flood retention capacity. Drought, well, if we've got balancing ponds alongside canals, which is part of our restoration aims for where it's being quarried, we can fill those with water, or part fill them with water. Then when there's not enough, you can pump the water out from those balancing lakes into the canal to top up the river to help with public water supply. And that's an ongoing conversation we're having with Milton Keynes at the moment. Looking at on the water, boats, canoes, etc., paddle boards, in the water, fish, aquatic life, and beside the water, tourism, etc. So let's trundle on, go through the next slide, if I can get this to follow its behavior. This is just a slightly different way of looking at those dimensions of the water. It'll be part of the deck that comes out, I'm not going to spend time talking through that at the moment. So on the topic of supply, summer demand for drinking water goes higher and higher every year. Milton Keynes, which is near Buckingham Canal where we are building an extra 150,000 houses on top of the around about 200,000 that are already there. One of the comments from the water company was, interesting, not sure we're going to have enough water to put the tap in for everybody that wants to run a bath on the same day. So we've been piggybacking on that messaging and that as an approach to planners at a strategic level across authorities and bits and pieces, talking to water companies. And obviously there's abstraction limits on the river. How do we help increase that? So our concept is to have balancing lakes, as it says here, along the line of a restored canal, part of which is going to be quarried. And as that quarrying is reinstated, leaving balancing lakes to put water into, let it naturally wear off of the canal in times of too much. When you need it, you can use solar pumps, because typically the time you need it for drought, the sun's out. So you move the water into that canal, it goes down the canal, finds a spillway into the river. Ours is fortunately a contour canal, so we're all along one side of the valley. So ours is a fairly simple solution. Other canals usually have sections where they cross water courses. And using solar power, push that water back into the channel, over into the river to fulfill abstraction needs by the water company. We're terming it negative abstraction. We've had conversations with 2 water companies on that topic and been warmly met by both, as long as those holes that we create with our partners, the quarry, are big enough. And that's an ongoing conversation. Also, we saw potential that we could give revenue from the restored canal to farmers, because they're looking to irrigate. And if they're being hit by abstraction limits in drought, then they can't take as much water out of the river. So potentially there's the opportunity for restored canals to look at revenue by letting farmers take the water within limits and controls and all that great stuff. Jumping around a little bit, green blue infrastructure. We all know the CRT messaging on well-being, which I totally agree with. The benefits of being close to water. But as part of the restoration community, we should be able to leverage, a bit of an American word, isn't it? Use that CRT collateral for the benefits of being next to the water. And certainly that's a conversation we're having with our 2 unitary authority councils that our canal passes through. Also, the social prescribing work that's already been started by CRT, we're looking at that, and we're fortunate in Buckingham, one of the local GPs leads the care commissioning group on social prescribing. So we're deep into that. Well, see, that's unfair. We're deep into the preliminary discussions on that to get that rolling out as part of our restoration mantra of social prescribing, to come along and have a walk by our restoring canal or by our restored canal sections, or better still, come and do some volunteering and assist us. In order to get that access to green infrastructure, you've got to look at making sure it's publicly accessible. I think we all know that. It's looking at the ability to get to the towpath and follow the canal. And sometimes, certainly I know Lichfield do a great job of maintaining their walkways along the route of the canal. We've struggled over COVID and some of the very sudden downpours that caused the green stuff to grow, particularly the wild imitation rhubarb, to about 4 foot high along the sides. So we have to constantly maintain that public access, but it pays off. To the point we're currently putting a heritage trail along our canal, which will leverage all of that route. And wherever possible, we'll make it DDA compliant. So wherever we've been doing towpath surfacing, we've always made sure it's 1.4 meters wide. It feels like a box ticking exercise. It's not. It enables people who have mobility issues, such as my daughter, to be able to go down there with a wheelchair for support, and etc. Aquatic life, big buzzword that people love to use in biodiversity plans and things, is all about eutrophic waters. If you don't know what eutrophic means, go look it up. It's basically the difference in chemical makeup of nutrients and things in the water that varies between flowing rivers and less flowing water bodies such as ditches, ponds, lakes, and canals. There's a whole different range of critters, invertebrates, macroinvertebrates, that are in the bottom of the canal versus what are in the river. Some of them are common, but there are different environments that bring benefits, and that can again get you biodiversity credits. We're currently in the throes of discussing with a developer who's looking to put some warehousing in next to us to sell to them a six-figure number of cash to us for those biodiversity credits, because we've demonstrated the invertebrates and macroinvertebrates and butterflies and all of that great stuff. So flora and fauna, butterflies, dragonflies. We restored 1/2 mile of canal as our first venture into getting a section into water. And despite the spelling mistake there, that example section has 12 different kinds of butterflies, 4 of which are on the endangered species register. We're fortunate to have a local wildlife recorder who goes down there probably about every 6 weeks and sends us a report from sort of March through to October of what he sees, and the list is just amazing. But we keep that as an ongoing log. We publish that in our newsletter, and that gives us those green biodiversity credentials for when we're going for grant applications that have a biodiversity theme about them. We've even acquired some reed warblers. I've never seen a reed warbler apart from a picture of one on our newsletter, but I've heard them because they hide deep in the reeds that are growing a little bit too successfully in our section near Buckingham. We deliberately, when we planted that, worked with contractors to get what's called lovingly locally prevalent plants. So they're the ones that grow, in our case, along the Ouse Valley. And we chose from that what species we would plant and where. And that section is very much almost overgrown now. So this winter's activities is to thin that out and transplant some of that removed planting to other sections of the canal that we're working on. In an ideal world, almost treating it like a nursery section. Times of excess. We all know what flooding is. A lot of us are fortunate to not experience it. Some people are very unfortunate to experience it. Farmers are quite used to it, but still don't enjoy it because it washes away lots of the goodness and topsoil. So back in 2008, I think it was, might have been 2007, the Gloucester floods that were all over the news at the time led to an inquiry done by Lord Pitt, in which he quite heavily criticised Environment Agency and DEFRA for not looking to use linear flood attenuation. Now, in my mind, that's a big, long, straight bit of ditch full of water called a canal. So we can leverage, as I said before, the freeboard, that section between the top of the water and the top of the towpath, to raise it. So when we're restoring, we should consider that design and look at building in greater freeboard to help with flood retention, and look at balancing lakes and other structures along the lines of the canal. Certainly that's what we're doing with our big vision that we have for the restoration, particularly with this quarrying partner. And they're quite happy to think about it in terms of after use, because along with the balancing lakes comes leisure, water sports, etc., fishing, biodiversity, all of those great things. You just need to manage the water levels appropriately if you're going to fill them up, and make sure that that's safe. And then obviously when you come back to using that water, making sure that the survivability of the fish investment and all that stuff goes on. And again, we've got fishing clubs who are running their own former reservoirs along our canal, along with discussions with us about what they'd like to do in those balancing lakes. It sounds a little bit callous, but I put here springboard on the back of events. It's always an opportune time to go and get involved with your local councils when people have unfortunately experienced flooding, and remind them that your restoration project can probably provide part of a solution at a relatively low cost by working in partnership. Water quality. One of the pieces that we're very much focused on is reed beds. The technical term within the EA is constructed wetlands. And by planting the right species into your beds and passing water that's coming into the canal through those beds or out of the canal, in one case with us, into the river, we're helping to take up those inorganic nutrients. Phosphate's the classic one. We have, because of the valley, the nature of the valley, the River Ouse and Buckingham, we have evidence via the Environment Agency who've done dye tests, etc., that lots of people move in, put the dishwasher next to the sink, and then go, where am I going to put the washing machine? I know, it'll either go in the garage, in the conservatory, or somewhere else. Where am I going to put the discharge hose? Oh, look, there's a drain, I'll put it in that. And a lot of people don't recognise that that drain is just a surface water drain. And all it's doing is going to a bigger and bigger pipe and eventually into the local watercourse. And certainly we've got a lot of that in Buckingham, which is phosphate pollution from the detergents in washing powder. And so by helping with putting reed beds and moving some of the meandering of the discharge points into these ditches and plantation sites of constructed wetlands to put right reeds in there, and then making sure they're harvested every year, those pollutants of phosphate and such like can be leached out of the water, resulting in water quality. So as you design your restoration, think about where discharge points are into nearby watercourses, how you can divert, improve the quality, and harvest that as a water source for the restoration project. Sediment, be mindful when you're interceding water for quality improvements that you are going to get sediment if it's road drainage and such like. You're also going to get some other pollutants in there, be it road grit, tire fragments, all that kind of stuff. So you need to think about settlement pounds. A lot of cases on the side of new motorways, you'll see the giant little settlement pond. Giant little, there's an oxymoron. The settlement pond being built to take the storm level event water for that section of motorway, fill it up and then let it slowly into the watercourse. But it also acts as a settlement pound to let the particulates fall to the bottom. But it does mean you have to consider scraping, dredging, cleaning that pond on a periodic cycle. I've got at the bottom there, canal weirs discharges may have an impact on diluting other discharges. It's seen as a benefit. So if you've got some grey water coming into a watercourse and your canal's taking cleaner water and a spill weir is discharging it, think about where that discharge point wants to be. Because if upstream there is a negative event, your slightly downstream can be a positive event to mitigate that negative event. And certainly with discussions with our catchment manager, we've been talking about those low-level pollution sources and how a restored waterway can help dilute and eliminate some of the effect of those. And so an example would be a domestic, what's the words? It's not a cesspit, it's a domestic sewage treatment plant that discharges effluent typically into a ditch and then into a river. And the effluent is considered to be acceptable. But through use of the canal, and discharge suitably sited places, we can dilute the effect of that effluent and make it less impactful on that part of the river. Giant sud schemes. The best one in our area, the example, is the plans for the Bedford and Milton Keynes, which is basically one long channel, new watercourse, sustained by the water from runoff. We're also looking at this warehouse development as a source of water to be able to mitigate our need to do a diversionary channel, which has 9.7, I think we came to the other night, meters height difference. So as the boat movements occur, the water movement comes down. How do we mitigate that? Well, by taking water achieved by hard surface displacement from the warehouse development and solar pumping that back into the canal at the top. We've done numbers that prove we can mitigate part of the water loss by the boat movement. So it's a hell of a spreadsheet, but it's getting there. Isolated canal sections. What do you do when you're not yet connected segment of canal overtops? Well, you can use it again to dilute some of those low-level pollution sources into the river by discharging into existing surface water sewers as a temporary outflow, as I say there. Your best friend on a lot of this stuff is your inland drainage board. Most people will know that the Environment Agency are out there. They cover ordinary watercourses, which to you and me is rivers, and 9 meters each side of it. Anything outside of 9 meters each side of the river is typically covered by an inland drainage board. And if there's no inland drainage board, then the third fallback is the surface water management team in the local council. So do go and get to know your inland drainage board, and then you can start talking about big words like impoundment licenses versus abstraction licenses versus transfer licenses. Abstraction is where you take it all away. Impoundment is where you put it into a pond instead of it being a stream. And transfer licenses is where you move it from place A to place B, but it still ends up going back into the watercourse in a very similar place to place C where it originally went. And there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of willingness to help you get it right, certainly with our local inland drainage board. So I'm going to pause there and see what questions we've got up in the chat. Jonathan, have we got any access to the chat yet?
We haven't had any questions come in so far, but if anyone has anything they want to ask, pop it in now. You can use either the chat or the Q&A function.
Okay. Well, whilst we're waiting for people to get their keyboards warmed up and become fellow keyboard warriors, try and get that out of the way. No, it's not going to go out of the way. I'll have to minimize it. Where'd that one go? So a couple of links in the presentation for interesting bedtime reading. These were done tail end of last year, so not sure if there's any updates on them, but the Regulators Alliance for Progressing Infrastructure Development, well, wonderful acronym, RAPID. Never sure whether they make up the acronym and then try and make the words fit it or the other way around. But these are very good documents and worth looking at as ways of getting additional funding opportunities if you're able to take your canal restoration and put it into a water-based theme. So those will be in the deck when Jonathan sends it round.
Yeah.
Who and where? Obviously, we've got our friends in CRT. don't think there's any canal restoration groups who are restoring canals that are connected to a water course that isn't EA or CRT managed. If there are, let me know, because I'd like to add them to my list. But those are the two national bodies. Always go and make friends with them. Don't go to them when you need something. Go to them when you don't need something and buy them coffee. And then when they see an opportunity, they come to you. It's all about relationships, but everybody knows that. The Water Resources England, we had a presentation from a couple of times ago. I can't remember if it was APPG or one of the IWA seminar webinars, but they are, again, a very useful bunch of people to go talk to. Never be afraid to pick up the phone and go and talk to these organisations. Yeah, it might take you a few layers of banging your head against the wall before you get an answer. And certainly the Inland Drainage Board we found locally are very, very friendly, because they see that we can help them solve their problems as much as them help us to solve ours. But they do have very different boundaries to EA and CRT and everything else. So do be prepared for talking to 2 or 3 of these different bodies and authorities. Anyone who's not talking to their county councils should go home now and stop restoring their canal, because you do really need that level of support. We did a couple of presentations themed around climate change, themed around waste and minerals. Look and see what's going on in your local unitary or county council as to what they're out consulting on this half of the year. And then you can usually latch something onto that around your canal and water, particularly now that they have responsibility for flooding and managing local flood risks. Again, we've had a number of flooding issues in Buckingham and along the Ouse Valley, and there's been various reports come back, and we always try and get a little mention of our intention to restore the canal into those reports, because it starts to drive the evidence base when we're going for funding. And private developers and landowners, very early days when we started talking to one of the ongoing developers, it was, by the way, you can put your water into us. At this point in time, one of those examples is a culvert currently owned by CRT, which is proposed to be replaced with a much bigger culvert to mitigate the increased flood runoff from the hard surfaces. But that culvert will now lead into a balancing pond, which will be able to pump up into the canal to mitigate boat movement through the revised channel. So that comes from an initial conversation talking to the developers of how much of the site are you going to give over to sustainable drainage scheme. So next steps, you need to find a lead organisation to take your thoughts forward. There is out there the IWA CRT hub. You've all got friends in CRT. You should be able to find a CRT hydrologist. And it's one of the things that we've been talking about, looking in the background of the hub of what do societies need in terms of the skill bases. Hydrology for me is becoming very high up the agenda. It's one of the things we're lacking of a formal hydrology report to turn around and say the numbers that these crazy blokes have come up with are or aren't realistic to be able to submit with our planning applications. But it is one of the things that IDB and the EA will want to see, that you've at least done the calculations and someone's verified them. The managed wetlands can be part of biodiversity net gain on where you've got development, building, houses, industrial estates or whatever, as part of the biodiversity net gain, which is still seems to be in limbo land in the government with everything that's gone on, going on, but very soon is going to become part of the planning policy. Most authorities now require the evidence for biodiversity net gain, even though it's not yet, as far as I'm aware, being actually executed as a legal requirement. So let's see if we've got any chat and Q&A going on now then. What have we got? Didn't mention that benefits to nature specifically. Yes, you're right. I sort of broadly covered it. Let me go back up there. I'm going to come back there. Yeah, there we go. So of these 5, it sits in there typically on the in, but also in beside. That's where the nature is, be it the fringe, be it the hedgerow, be it the aquatic life, the biodiversity living in the canal. So I haven't called it out as nature. In one of the other slides there, we have started talking about, if I get the right page, no, it's gone into hide. We did sort of say under the surface and beside the channel. So the biodiversity theme, I think, is there. But when you're talking to people, the concept of water was the theme behind this chat, this presentation, looking at the dimensions of water. So I wouldn't actually say biodiversity was a dimension of water because it's across several of them, but it is a theme that runs across them. So thank you for that.
Audrey has asked, rather surprised that you not mentioned dredging as a means of increasing capacity within existing canals, as some of the current closures may not have been needed if canals had been maintained to their construction dimensions. Is there anything you can speak on in regards to dredging?
Yeah, I mean, anything I can speak on to go on to dredging. We've just literally yesterday received confirmation that we've it's been agreed for us to buy a second-hand dredger from CRT, which is a narrow dredger because we need a narrow one for our canal, despite having a broad beam workboat at the moment and another dredger. Long story about that. But yeah, absolutely. In terms of increasing the volume of capacity, dredging obviously clears the bottom and improves the amount of water that can be in there. That's good and bad. It's good in the sense of it improves it for navigation. It's good in the sense of it improves its overall capacity. It's bad in the sense of it disturbs the dredging and what materials are in it and what's heavy metals, cadmium, arsenic, cyanide. All of those are in our dredging reports that we've got for ours. Fairly low levels. None of them are significant enough to prevent us moving the dredging from the bottom. The highest one we've got is zinc. So if you've got high zinc, you can't spread the dredgings on arable farmland and risk it getting into the cattle, the milk, the beef, etc. So there's always the issues with what is the dredge material. And obviously, as you disturb that, you increase the dissolved amount in the water, which can then affect the biodiversity, let alone dissolved oxygen levels for fish and all this kind of great stuff. So I think dredging is an important element of water management, but it's not necessarily the answer in every case. And if it is, you've got to consider where you're going to put it. I had one number quoted to me in a conversation a couple of months ago that says for every pound you spend on dredging, you have to spend £100 on the paperwork and getting rid of it. So it's those kind of scales. Now, there is some work coming up with the IWA hub and WERG around resurrecting dredging rights and volunteers. Big, long story, separate conversation. But all of that work in terms of mitigating where are you putting it, what's in it, and what's it doing to the water quality needs to be part of that decision matrix before you just go out there and get your spades out. But yes, dredging is a fair comment.
If anyone else has got any questions, do pop them to us now. Or even just discussion points that you'd like to ask. But apart from that, if there's nothing else that you want to ask about at the present, then it'd probably be where we end things. If you've got any answers that you think of or questions that you think of before or after this session ends, you can always pop them to us, and I will propose them to Terry via email, and we can probably get an answer off to you in due course. But
yeah,
if there's nothing else to come in,
I'd add to that, comments. Don't make this a one-way street. Don't just treat me as a demigod with all the answers. I knew none of this before I came along, and I don't have the monopoly on good ideas. So, you know, let's make it a dialogue rather than just straightforward questions. Very happy for people to get rid of that. Very happy for people to comment and give a different perspective or an addition or whatever, and we can always send the deck around again with further feedback and thoughts. It's healthy to have a debate.
We've got this in from Mike. Next report from IWA seeks to establish the clear benefits of waterways. Obvious things like economic regeneration, but also more overlooked things, such as well-being and social prescribing. Most importantly, this report is full of good evidence from all over the country to back up each benefit, due for release soon. Sounds like it's on very much on topic, so keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, and part of the idea of this webinar was to broaden that view, and as I say, lots of good conversations. My view is, don't start your conversation with, I want to restore a canal to put some boats on it. Start your conversation with, I want to restore a canal because it can help so many ways around the water. Here's some of those dimensions. So, right. Well,
brilliant. Well, it's almost time to wrap up for today's webinar. So thank you very much to Terry for taking the time to deliver this webinar, and thank you for all of you for joining today. And thank you for sharing your thoughts and your questions and experiences. And if there are any questions from today that you did not get around to answering, or anything that you think of in due course, we can happily pass that on and try and get a dialogue started, as Terry said. And we'll have further workshops to come in the coming months, so keep an eye on them as they're announced. And thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week.